The evening air was warm and filled with the soft hum of conversation. The Grand Hotel's lobby shimmered under golden chandeliers, casting light on the polished marble floors. Waiters moved quickly, balancing trays of sparkling glasses and delicate plates of hors d'oeuvres. Among them was a young waitress, carrying herself with a quiet determination. Her uniform was simple, nothing like the fancy suits and dresses of the guests, but she wore it with dignity. She had worked here for years, learning to move without disturbing the flow of the high-class events, to notice who needed what before they even asked, and to keep her own feelings tucked away. Tonight was just another night, or at least that's what she thought. The guests arrived in waves. Men in tailored tuxedos and women in elegant gowns laughed and clinked glasses, their voices weaving together like a symphony of wealth and privilege. She moved among them, attentive to every request, making sure nothing was spilled, nothing forgotten. Yet, amid the polished smiles and polite chatter, she felt invisible. That was nothing new. She had long grown used to the feeling of being unseen, unnoticed, and underestimated. She had learned early in life that patience and quiet effort often went unrecognized, but she never let that stop her. There was a spark inside her that refused to be dimmed, a private resilience that kept her moving forward, no matter how small her role seemed. At the center of the room stood a grand piano, gleaming under the warm lights. It was polished to perfection, its black surface reflecting the gold of the chandeliers. Tonight, the piano was not just a decoration. It was the focal point of the evening. The billionaire, a man known for his wealth and his temper, had arrived earlier than most. His reputation was legendary. He demanded attention wherever he went and expected the world to bend to his will. People whispered about his fortune, his sharp mind, and his impatience. Few had ever met him up close, and fewer still had managed to leave an impression on him. He had a habit of testing people, often in ways that seemed cruel. Some called it a game, others called it manipulation, but to him it was merely a way to see the truth of a person's character. Tonight, as he watched the event unfold from a distance, his eyes settled on the young waitress. She moved through the crowd with careful precision, never stumbling, never hesitating. A calm presence amid the controlled chaos. He was curious. There was something different about her, something he could not quite name. Perhaps it was the way she carried herself, or the subtle rhythm she hummed under her breath as she walked. Whatever it was, it drew his attention. He signaled to one of his assistants, whispering something that caused a small flurry of activity. Moments later, the young waitress was being directed toward the piano. Her heart sank. She did not know why she had been chosen, only that refusing might not be an option. She hesitated for a moment, glancing back at the tables filled with wealthy guests, then forward at the piano that seemed to grow larger and more imposing with each step. She had played piano before, but only in small, private settings. Never in front of an audience like this, and certainly not under the watchful gaze of someone like him. The billionaire watched, a faint smirk playing on his lips. He expected nervousness, a faltering performance, and perhaps some amusement for himself and his guests. The waitress took a deep breath, her fingers brushing against the smooth surface of the keys. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Every eye was on her now, the room holding its collective breath. She closed her eyes briefly, recalling the countless hours she had spent practicing in secret, the moments of solitude when music had been her refuge from the world. The piano was more than an instrument. It was a voice she had kept hidden, a part of herself that few had ever heard. She sat down, her hands hovering above the keys, trembling slightly. The first note was hesitant, almost shy, but it marked the beginning of a journey she could no longer avoid. The guests shifted in their seats, some curious, some skeptical. The billionaire leaned back, arms crossed, his expression one of expectation and mild amusement. He had seen many people falter under pressure, and he fully anticipated this young woman would be no exception. As she continued, her initial hesitation lingered, each note careful and measured. She could feel the eyes of the crowd, the weight of their judgment pressing down. But slowly a change began. The music started to flow more naturally, her fingers finding the keys with increasing confidence. She remembered the lessons learned in solitude. Every note mattered. Every pause was deliberate. Every movement could convey emotion. She allowed herself to feel the music, to let it guide her rather than control her. The room began to notice. Conversations quieted, and the previously murmuring guests now listened with rapt attention. The billionaire's eyes narrowed, intrigued. He had expected a simple display of nervousness, but instead, he saw focus and determination. The young waitress was not performing for approval or recognition. She was performing because it was a part of her, a truth she could no longer hide. Her hands moved with grace, each note deliberate and expressive. The room seemed to shift around her, the air thick with anticipation. She was no longer just a waitress. She had become the center of the room, commanding attention through her art. For a moment, she forgot everything else. The wealth, the judgment, the pressure. All of it melted away as she lost herself in the music. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from exhilaration. She realized that she had been underestimated all her life, not because she lacked talent, but because people had failed to see beyond appearances. Tonight, she was proving something not just to them, but to herself. Every note was a statement of identity, a claim to her own space in a world that had often overlooked her. The guests leaned forward, captivated. The skeptical glances and murmurs of doubt had vanished, replaced by genuine admiration. Even the billionaire, who rarely showed emotion, felt a stir of something unfamiliar. He could sense the raw power in her music, the quiet strength that had been hiding behind her modest exterior. For the first time, he wondered if perhaps he had misjudged her. The realization was unsettling, but also fascinating. She was not just meeting his expectations. She was shattering them. As the music continued, the room transformed. What had begun as a simple request had become a moment of revelation. The young waitress was no longer invisible. She was seen, fully and undeniably, through the notes she played. She did not need words or gestures to prove herself. The piano spoke for her. And in that moment, amidst the chandeliers and the polished floors, she discovered a truth she had always known deep inside. Her talent, her voice, and her resilience were more powerful than any judgment or expectation. The night, which had begun as another ordinary shift, had now become the first chapter of a story that would change everything for her. The young waitress had taken her first steps into the spotlight, and the piano felt different under her fingers. No longer just a piece of furniture, it had become a bridge between her and the people who had once seemed so unreachable. The first hesitant notes had passed, and now she began to play with a quiet confidence, drawing in the room with every sound. She could feel the pulse of the music inside her, like it was part of her heartbeat, guiding her hands across the keys. Guests watched, some leaning forward, some holding their glasses a little tighter as if to anchor themselves to the moment. Conversations had ceased, and the air had changed, charged with an unfamiliar energy. It was not just a performance anymore. It was a revelation. Every movement of her fingers carried a story. Every chord resonated with something deeper than the room had expected. She was telling them something they could not see, but could feel. At first, a few people exchanged quiet glances, uncertain what to make of the performance. They were used to entertainers who performed for show, who danced or sang in predictable ways. This was different. The music was intimate and raw, yet controlled and deliberate. There was a vulnerability that made it human, a quiet honesty that was impossible to ignore. The young waitress was speaking without words, and the audience was listening without resistance. The billionaire, sitting off to the side, observed intently. He had expected hesitation, maybe embarrassment, or a lackluster display of talent. What he saw instead was strength, precision, and emotion that defied the simple image of a waitress he had conjured in his mind. He leaned slightly forward, curiosity overtaking the smirk that had initially played on his face. For someone who had been surrounded by wealth and power all his life, this was a rare moment of genuine surprise. He realized that he had underestimated her in every possible way. She felt a strange mixture of nerves and exhilaration. The pressure of the audience, the presence of the billionaire, the weight of expectation. All of it was still there, pressing on her, but it had changed form. It had become fuel instead of fear. Every note she played built on the last, creating a rhythm and melody that flowed naturally. She remembered the long nights of practice, when the world outside her small room faded, and the piano was her only companion. Those private hours, unnoticed by anyone, had prepared her for this moment. She had learned to channel her emotions through her hands, to let the music express what she could not say aloud. A soft murmur spread through the audience as more guests began to realize the depth of her talent. Some faces reflected shock, others admiration. The usual social barriers seemed to dissolve, replaced by a shared appreciation for the purity of the music. Even the staff, who had seen her at her job for years, stopped in their tracks, captivated by the transformation taking place before their eyes. It was a reminder that the world often overlooks talent hidden in unexpected places. The waitress did not pause. She was no longer thinking about the audience or their judgment. Her fingers danced across the keys, guided by instinct and emotion. Each note was deliberate yet seemed effortless. She played with a blend of technical skill and heartfelt expression that drew everyone into the story she was telling. The music ebbed and flowed, soft and delicate at times, powerful and commanding at others. The room was alive, not with chatter or movement, but with the shared experience of being touched by something beautiful and unexpected. The billionaire's expression shifted from curiosity to something more complex. He was not used to being surprised, especially not by someone so young and seemingly ordinary. He watched as the waitress's confidence grew with each passing moment. There was no need for her to prove herself to anyone. She was already doing it through the honesty of her music. He realized that control and coercion had no place here. What mattered was the truth of her talent, and it was undeniable. Time seemed to stretch as she played. The world outside the hotel melted away, leaving only the room, the piano, and the music. Her heart pounded with a mixture of fear, exhilaration, and relief. She was no longer just serving drinks and food. She was commanding the attention of a room full of strangers, turning their skepticism into admiration. The power of the piano was matched only by the power she felt within herself, a sense of purpose and validation that she had never known in her everyday life. Guests began to exchange glances filled with awe. Some whispered to their neighbors, sharing their astonishment at the skill and emotion unfolding before them. The initial expectation of entertainment had shifted into genuine engagement. They were no longer passive observers. They were participants in a moment that transcended social status and wealth. The music had created a bridge between worlds that rarely intersected, connecting the waitress's hidden talent with an audience that had underestimated her. As the performance continued, she allowed herself to feel the story in the music. It was a story of persistence, of quiet strength, and of moments spent alone, dreaming of something greater. Each chord echoed the hardships she had faced, the long days and nights of work that often went unnoticed. The piano became a voice for all the times she had been overlooked, all the times she had been underestimated. And in return, the audience listened, not just with their ears but with their hearts. The billionaire, now fully attentive, could not look away. He had spent years surrounded by people who sought to impress him, to gain his approval, or to use him for their own benefit. Rarely did anyone manage to captivate him without effort or agenda. But this young woman, who had been nothing more than a waitress in his eyes moments ago, had done exactly that. He felt an unfamiliar respect, tinged with the awareness that he had misjudged her entirely. This was not a performance meant to please him. It was an expression of something deeper, something authentic. The young waitress felt a surge of confidence as she played. She had overcome the initial fear, and now the music flowed effortlessly, guided by her heart and memories. She no longer felt coerced. She felt empowered. The piano was not a tool of someone else's will but an extension of herself. The room, once filled with doubt and judgment, now seemed to vibrate with recognition of her skill. Every note she struck was a quiet declaration. She belonged here not as a servant, not as a background figure, but as a musician with a voice that demanded to be heard. As the performance progressed, even the most skeptical guests could not deny the talent in front of them. The music had transformed their perception, shifting the focus from who she was to what she could do. They had come expecting entertainment, but they were witnessing something far greater. A revelation of hidden potential, a testament to the strength that often lies unnoticed in ordinary people. The young waitress had taken a step into a world that rarely acknowledged her kind, and she was leaving a mark that could not be erased. She played with an intensity that grew with every measure, each note carrying emotion and precision. The audience sat in rapt attention, captivated by the story unfolding through her fingers. The music was no longer just a sequence of sounds. It was a living, breathing entity, connecting her with everyone present in a way words could never achieve. Even the billionaire, who had seen it all, felt the pull of the music and the undeniable presence of the performer. He recognized that he was witnessing more than skill. He was witnessing authenticity, courage, and a rare brilliance that could not be commanded or bought. The young waitress continued, feeling the room transform around her. The initial fear and hesitation had been replaced by a quiet pride, an understanding that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. The piano was her voice, the music her message. In that moment, she was not just a waitress. She was a storyteller, an artist, and a person who had finally stepped into the recognition she deserved. The room, once filled with wealth and expectation, was now united in admiration for her talent. And in that shared experience, she found a sense of fulfillment and validation that would stay with her long after the last note was played. As the young waitress continued to play, a remarkable transformation took place. The timid hesitation that had marked the beginning of her performance was gone. Her hands moved with confidence across the keys, each note precise yet full of emotion. It was as though the piano had become an extension of herself, a channel for everything she had felt but never been able to express. The room, once filled with murmurs and quiet judgments, was now completely silent. Every guest was drawn into the story she was telling, caught in the rhythm and melody that poured naturally from her fingers. She felt a strange blend of nervous energy and exhilaration. Each note she struck was a declaration of her presence, a quiet rebellion against the world that had underestimated her. She remembered all the times she had been overlooked, treated as invisible, and dismissed. Those experiences, which had once seemed like burdens, had now become the fuel for her performance. The piano allowed her to speak without words, to convey her resilience and strength in a way that was undeniable. The music became a voice she had been waiting her whole life to use. Guests watched with a growing sense of wonder. The initial skepticism that had hovered in the room began to vanish, replaced by genuine admiration. They were captivated not just by her skill but by the emotion she infused into each note. The delicate shifts in tempo, the gentle crescendos, and the occasional lingering pauses all spoke to a depth of feeling that few had expected. Some leaned forward, unable to tear their eyes away. Others closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them and create images and feelings they could not describe. In that moment, the divide between servant and guest, between wealth and modesty, seemed to disappear. The billionaire, seated with arms crossed, was no longer the dominant figure in the room. His usual sense of control had been quietly challenged by her performance. He had expected a show, perhaps a nervous or flawed attempt at music, but what he witnessed was something far beyond his expectations. He felt a flicker of surprise and, uncomfortably, respect. There was no manipulation here, no attempt to impress him. She was performing because it was a part of her, an expression of her true self. That authenticity was impossible to ignore. She lost herself in the music, letting it guide her rather than thinking about the audience. Every note carried a story, every chord echoed a memory. She recalled late nights practicing in empty rooms, the quiet moments where only her music and her determination existed. Those solitary hours, often unnoticed by anyone, had prepared her for this moment. Her fingers moved with a rhythm she had known for years but had never revealed publicly. Now, in front of an audience that had once judged her solely by her role as a waitress, she felt empowered and alive. The room seemed to breathe with her, responding to the subtle rises and falls of her playing. The audience was no longer just observing, they were experiencing. Their reactions were quiet, but they were there. Hearts racing, breaths held, eyes wide with wonder. The performance had shifted from being a test of skill to a shared moment of human connection. In a space that was usually defined by wealth and social status, her music had created equality, bridging the gap between performer and listener. Her confidence continued to grow with each passing minute. She was no longer afraid of mistakes or judgment. Instead, she embraced the imperfections, allowing them to become part of the music's authenticity. The audience responded in kind, leaning into the ebb and flow of her playing. The power of her performance was not in perfection but in honesty, in the raw expression of her inner world. She had discovered that her true strength lay in her ability to be vulnerable yet commanding at the same time. The billionaire, now fully attentive, realized that his assumptions about her were completely wrong. He had assumed that her place in life defined her abilities, that her modest role as a waitress meant she could not possess extraordinary talent. Watching her play challenged everything he believed about people, about status, and about potential. It was a humbling experience, one that left him both intrigued and unsettled. She had achieved something he rarely witnessed, captivating an audience purely through skill, emotion, and authenticity, without any need for grandeur or pretense. Meanwhile, the young waitress felt a growing sense of liberation. The pressure of the room, which had once weighed heavily on her, was now transformed into energy that fueled her playing. She could feel the connection between herself and the audience, a shared understanding that transcended words. Each note was a testament to her perseverance, to the hours spent in quiet practice, and to the resilience she had cultivated over years of being underestimated. The music allowed her to claim space in a world that often ignored people like her, and it gave her the confidence to own that space fully. As the song progressed, the depth of her talent became undeniable. The audience could sense that this was more than just a performance. It was a story, a journey through hardship, hope, and triumph. The subtle variations in tempo and tone, the carefully placed pauses, all conveyed emotion in a way that resonated with everyone present. The music had transformed from a sequence of notes into a living narrative, a reflection of her journey and her spirit. Those who had come expecting polite entertainment were now witnesses to a profound and moving experience. The room was silent except for the piano, yet the silence was filled with anticipation. Every listener was captivated, hanging on to each note as if it carried the weight of the world. The young waitress played with a sense of purpose, each movement deliberate, each chord a piece of herself shared with the room. She was no longer thinking about approval or expectation. She was simply expressing her truth. That truth was powerful, and the audience felt it deeply. The energy in the room shifted. The wealthy guests, who had initially viewed her with skepticism or amusement, were now deeply engaged. The music had broken down social barriers, reminding them that talent and emotion could not be judged by appearances. The waitress's performance had become a shared human experience, one that transcended class and circumstance. It was a reminder that beauty and skill could be found in the most unexpected places, and that recognition often comes to those who persist quietly until the right moment arrives. Her hands continued to glide over the keys, effortlessly blending technical precision with emotional depth. The audience was completely absorbed, some holding their breath in awe, others closing their eyes to better connect with the music. She felt a sense of pride, not from the attention, but from the realization that she was expressing herself fully and honestly. The piano had become a mirror of her soul, reflecting the strength, vulnerability, and resilience that had defined her journey. The billionaire, unable to hide his growing respect, shifted in his seat. He had been a man accustomed to control and influence, yet he found himself powerless in the face of her talent. For once, he was not the one commanding attention. She was. He realized that he was witnessing something rare, a person breaking free of expectation, revealing something extraordinary without needing to be told or coerced. It was a lesson in humility and perspective, one that he would not soon forget. The young waitress felt a quiet triumph as she reached the final passages of her song. The music had taken on a life of its own, carrying her beyond the fear and uncertainty she had felt moments ago. Each note was deliberate, each chord a declaration of her strength. The audience, fully immersed, could sense the culmination of years of dedication, practice, and perseverance. They were witnessing the emergence of a hidden talent that had been overlooked for far too long. As she prepared to end the piece, she felt a wave of emotion, a mixture of relief, pride, and exhilaration. The performance had begun as a challenge, something she was coerced into, but it had transformed into an expression of her true self. She had discovered that her voice, through music, could command attention, inspire admiration, and bridge divides. The room was silent, filled with anticipation, as she prepared for the final notes that would leave an indelible mark on everyone present. The transformation was complete. The hidden talent that had lain dormant was now fully revealed, and the young waitress had proven, above all else, that her worth and skill could not be measured by her station in life. The music filled the room with a presence that seemed almost alive. Every note the young waitress played carried a weight of emotion that could not be ignored. Guests who had arrived with skepticism and casual curiosity now found themselves holding their breath, captivated by the depth and beauty of her playing. She had transformed the atmosphere completely. What had begun as an ordinary event in a luxurious hotel was now something extraordinary, a shared moment of awe that touched everyone present. Her fingers moved over the piano keys with precision and grace, producing sounds that were both powerful and delicate. The audience could feel the story she was telling, though no words were spoken. There was a subtle rise and fall in the melody, a gentle rhythm that spoke of struggle and hope, of quiet perseverance. Each chord seemed to echo her journey, the challenges she had faced, the long hours of work, and the determination that had carried her this far. The music was no longer just notes on a scale. It was a reflection of her life, and everyone in the room was drawn into it. The guests, who had initially been polite but distant, now leaned forward in their seats. Their attention was rapt, their previous conversations forgotten. Some closed their eyes to fully absorb the sound, while others exchanged looks of disbelief and admiration. The piano had become a bridge between them and the performer, connecting social divides and reminding them that talent and emotion could not be measured by wealth or status. The young waitress was no longer just a server at the event. She was the center of the room, commanding attention through her artistry alone. The billionaire watched quietly from his seat, his usual air of control replaced by genuine curiosity. He had seen many talented people in his life, but there was something different about this performance. It was raw yet refined, personal yet universal. He had expected compliance, perhaps a simple display of skill, but what he saw was a revelation. The young waitress had taken what was meant to be a test and turned it into an opportunity to showcase her true self. He found himself drawn to her, not as a figure of authority, but as someone witnessing a rare and remarkable talent. She played with a sense of freedom that surprised even her. The initial fear that had accompanied her to the piano had melted away, replaced by a quiet confidence. She no longer thought about the audience or the billionaire's expectations. Instead, she focused entirely on the music, letting it guide her. Each note flowed naturally, carrying emotion and intention. She felt alive, fully present in the moment, and aware that she was creating something beautiful that resonated beyond herself. The room seemed to respond to her in kind. The silence was not empty. It was filled with anticipation, respect, and admiration. Even the staff, who had seen her serve countless tables over the years, watched in awe. The audience was captivated, unable to look away. The performance had become a shared experience, one that transcended social boundaries and connected everyone in the room through the power of music. The young waitress had created a moment that would linger in the memories of everyone present long after the final note was played. As she continued, her music began to tell a more complex story. There were moments of quiet reflection, soft passages that seemed almost fragile, followed by bursts of strength and intensity that filled the room with energy. The contrast between these sections highlighted her skill and emotional depth. She was no longer just playing the piano. She was conveying the full spectrum of human experience, from vulnerability to triumph. The audience felt each emotion as if it were their own, moved by the honesty and authenticity of her performance. The billionaire found himself leaning forward, completely absorbed. He was not used to being so captivated, so genuinely affected by a performance. He had assumed that his presence and authority would dominate the room, but the young waitress had shifted the focus entirely. He realized that he had underestimated her in every way, and it was a lesson that left him both humbled and intrigued. He watched as she transformed not just the space, but the perceptions of everyone within it, proving that talent and determination could command respect without any pretense. The young waitress felt a growing sense of empowerment. The piano had become a vessel for her voice, a way to express everything she had kept inside for so long. She played with intent, knowing that each note carried meaning. The room was no longer a place of judgment or expectation. It was a canvas for her art. The music had allowed her to step into a role she had never imagined for herself, and she embraced it fully. She felt a quiet pride, not from the attention she was receiving, but from the knowledge that she was expressing her true self with courage and honesty. Guests who had arrived indifferent or dismissive were now fully engaged. They watched in silence, captivated by the skill, emotion, and authenticity on display. The music had transformed the space, creating a connection that transcended social status and expectation. They were no longer merely observers. They were participants in a shared human experience. The young waitress had broken down barriers through her artistry, reminding everyone that talent and dedication could emerge from the most unexpected places. Her hands moved effortlessly across the keys, blending technical mastery with emotional depth. The music was alive, responding to her every thought and feeling. She felt a deep connection to the piano, as if it understood her innermost thoughts and emotions. The room was silent except for the notes she produced, yet the silence was filled with meaning. Every listener felt the power of her performance, recognizing the strength and vulnerability behind each chord. The young waitress had transformed herself and the room through her music, creating a moment that would be remembered for years. The billionaire could not look away. He had been accustomed to commanding attention, but here he was, captivated by someone he had assumed would be ordinary. He realized that control and coercion had no place in the presence of genuine talent. The young waitress had achieved something extraordinary. She had turned a moment of expectation into an opportunity for expression, commanding the room without force or authority. He found himself respecting her in a way he rarely felt for anyone. As the performance reached its crescendo, the audience remained completely absorbed. The music carried them through a journey of emotion and experience, leaving no one untouched. The young waitress played with confidence, grace, and authenticity, fully aware of the impact she was having. She had taken a situation that had initially been intimidating and turned it into a moment of triumph and connection. The piano had become her voice, and she had used it to communicate in a way that words could not capture. When the final notes lingered in the air, there was a pause that seemed to stretch time itself. The room was silent, filled with the weight of the experience they had just shared. Guests were moved, some holding their breath, others with tears quietly forming. The young waitress felt a wave of emotion, a mixture of relief, pride, and exhilaration. She had taken a challenge and transformed it into something extraordinary, not only proving her talent, but revealing the depth of her resilience and determination. The billionaire, seated at the edge of the room, allowed himself a rare moment of admiration. He realized that he had underestimated her, assuming that her role as a waitress defined her abilities. What he had witnessed was far beyond expectation. A performance that was authentic, moving, and unforgettable. He understood that talent, courage, and determination could not be measured by appearance or status. The young waitress had achieved something remarkable, commanding the room through her skill and heart. In that moment, the room felt united, despite the differences in wealth, status, and background. The music had created a shared experience, connecting everyone in a profound way. The young waitress had transformed the event from a typical high-class gathering into a moment of human connection, reminding all present of the power of talent, dedication, and authenticity. She had silenced doubt, broken expectations, and left a mark on everyone who had the privilege of witnessing her performance. The evening had begun with skepticism and hierarchy, but it ended with admiration, respect, and the quiet understanding that true talent could emerge from the most unexpected places. The young waitress's fingers moved with a precision and confidence that filled the room completely. Every note she played carried emotion, telling a story that had been waiting in her heart for years. The audience, once skeptical and casual, now hung on every sound. There were no murmurs, no whispers, only the piano and the story she was revealing. She had become more than a performer. She was a storyteller, speaking through her music in a language that everyone in the room could understand. She felt a wave of exhilaration mixed with calm focus. The piano had become a bridge, connecting her inner world with the audience in a way words could never do. She remembered the long nights of practice, alone in a small, quiet room, where the music was her only companion. Those private hours had honed her skill and shaped her resilience. Now, in front of a room filled with people who had underestimated her, she could finally share everything she had learned and felt. Each note was a piece of her life, every chord a reflection of her strength, perseverance, and courage. The guests were mesmerized. They had come expecting polite entertainment, a brief performance to pass the evening, but what they were experiencing was far beyond that. The music had transformed the atmosphere, creating a sense of awe and reverence. People leaned forward, their eyes wide with admiration, some closing their eyes to better feel the depth of the performance. They were no longer spectators. They were participants in a shared human experience, drawn into the emotion and skill that the young waitress displayed. The billionaire sat quietly, observing with a mixture of surprise and respect. He had expected a simple performance, one that would amuse the guests and perhaps entertain himself. Instead, he was witnessing something extraordinary. The young waitress had taken what was meant to be a test and turned it into a moment of revelation. Her talent, authenticity, and dedication were undeniable. He felt a rare emotion for someone he had initially underestimated: admiration. He realized that he had misjudged her entirely, assuming that her role as a waitress defined her abilities. The young waitress felt a growing sense of empowerment. The fear and hesitation she had felt moments ago had been replaced by a quiet confidence. The music flowed naturally from her, guided by instinct and emotion. She no longer worried about judgment or expectation. She was fully present in the moment. Each note she played was deliberate, each chord infused with meaning. She was not performing for approval. She was expressing her truth, and that truth resonated with everyone in the room. The audience, captivated by the performance, remained completely silent. The usual social barriers, the distinctions of wealth and status, had faded into the background. What mattered was the music, the story it told, and the person who created it. The young waitress had become the center of attention not through wealth or influence but through talent, courage, and the willingness to share her true self. The piano was her voice, and she used it to speak with clarity and power. She played with a sense of control and freedom that was mesmerizing. Her fingers moved effortlessly across the keys, blending technical skill with emotional depth. The music rose and fell, creating a journey that the audience could feel but not see. There were moments of quiet reflection, passages of gentle vulnerability, and surges of intensity that filled the room with energy. Each transition was seamless, each note intentional. The audience could sense the mastery behind every movement, the years of practice and the hours of dedication that had brought her to this moment. The billionaire, now fully engaged, leaned forward slightly. He had been accustomed to being the center of attention, to controlling the room with his presence. Yet here he was, captivated by someone he had assumed would be ordinary. He realized that power and status had no bearing on the authenticity and impact of true talent. The young waitress had taken a situation that could have been humiliating or intimidating and transformed it into a display of artistry and personal strength. He felt a profound respect for her, recognizing that her performance was a rare and remarkable accomplishment. The young waitress continued, her confidence growing with each measure. She was fully immersed in the music, allowing it to guide her rather than trying to control it. The room responded in kind, every listener absorbed by the story unfolding through sound. Some closed their eyes, letting the music create images and emotions within them. Others leaned forward, unable to look away from the hands that moved so skillfully across the keys. The performance had become a shared experience, one that transcended social boundaries and connected everyone in the room on a human level. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction as the piece approached its climax. The music had carried her through fear, uncertainty, and hesitation, and she now played with complete freedom and authority. Every note was deliberate, every chord a statement of her presence and talent. The audience could feel the culmination of years of dedication, practice, and resilience. They were witnessing the emergence of a hidden talent that had been overlooked for far too long, and they were captivated. The room remained completely silent as the final notes lingered in the air. The audience was frozen, caught between the end of the music and the overwhelming emotion it had created. The young waitress felt a mixture of relief, pride, and exhilaration. She had faced the challenge, transformed it into something extraordinary, and revealed her true self to the world. The performance had achieved more than recognition. It had created a connection, a moment of shared humanity that could not be replicated or forgotten. The billionaire allowed a small, genuine smile to cross his face. He had been proven wrong, and it was a humbling experience. The young waitress had demonstrated that talent, courage, and authenticity could command respect without any pretense or manipulation. He realized that he had underestimated her entirely, and in doing so, he had witnessed a rare and unforgettable display of human potential. The performance had shifted his perspective, reminding him that true talent and dedication are not bound by social roles or expectations. The guests, moved by the performance, began to applaud softly at first, then with growing intensity. Some were visibly emotional, touched by the depth and authenticity of what they had witnessed. The applause was not just for technical skill but for the courage and honesty that had been expressed through the music. The young waitress had silenced the room, not through fear or authority, but through talent, passion, and the willingness to share her true self. She sat at the piano, breathing deeply, feeling the impact of her performance. The room was filled with admiration, respect, and awe. She had taken a challenge that could have been intimidating and turned it into a moment of triumph and recognition. The music had created a space where social barriers were irrelevant, where only talent, dedication, and authenticity mattered. She had proven, above all else, that her worth could not be measured by her role or status, but by her ability to express herself fully and honestly. The young waitress felt a quiet satisfaction as the applause continued. She had faced her fear, shared her gift, and left an indelible mark on everyone present. The room had been transformed by her music, and she had been transformed by the experience. In that moment, she understood that her talent was not just a personal achievement, but a bridge that connected her to others, creating a shared understanding and admiration that transcended social boundaries. She had silenced the room with her music, and in doing so, she had claimed her voice, her presence, and her place in the world. The last note hung in the air, lingering like a breath caught between time and silence. The room, which had been completely absorbed in the music, seemed to pause, holding its collective attention on the young waitress sitting at the piano. She exhaled slowly, her fingers still poised above the keys, aware of the power she had just wielded. The audience, once skeptical and casual, now looked at her with admiration, awe, and an undeniable respect. The performance had transformed the space, leaving a mark that went beyond applause or polite acknowledgement. It had created a moment that would linger in memory for years. The billionaire, who had initially insisted she play, now approached her with a quiet intensity. His usual air of control had softened, replaced by genuine respect and curiosity. He had watched her transform a situation meant to test her into something extraordinary. There was a humility in his demeanor, a recognition that he had underestimated someone who, by every outward measure, had seemed ordinary. He offered a nod, small but meaningful, acknowledging not just her skill, but the courage and authenticity behind it. The young waitress felt a rush of emotion. The tension that had accompanied her through the performance had dissolved, leaving a mixture of relief, pride, and exhilaration. She realized that she had done more than play the piano. She had spoken a truth she had long kept hidden. The music had become her voice, a way to communicate her resilience, her passion, and her talent without needing words. And the audience had listened, fully and openly, recognizing the value she brought into the room. Guests began to applaud softly at first, then with growing intensity. Their claps and cheers were not just for technical skill but for the courage it took to reveal something so personal in such a public space. Some faces were wet with tears, moved by the honesty and emotion that had poured from the piano. Others smiled, astonished that someone who had seemed so unassuming could produce such beauty and depth. The applause grew until it filled the entire room, echoing off the high ceilings and polished floors, a collective acknowledgement of her achievement. The young waitress rose from the piano, a mixture of humility and quiet pride in her posture. She had been thrust into a spotlight she had never sought, and yet she had risen to the challenge, allowing her talent and authenticity to shine. She met the eyes of the billionaire, who seemed genuinely impressed. He had expected compliance or hesitation, yet what he had witnessed was confidence, skill, and a voice that could not be ignored. In that moment, he understood that her worth was not defined by her occupation, but by the depth of her talent and the strength of her character. The guests continued to talk in hushed, reverent tones, sharing their amazement and admiration with each other. The atmosphere had shifted from polite entertainment to something much deeper, a recognition of human potential, creativity, and courage. The young waitress had broken the barriers of expectation, showing that talent could emerge from the most unexpected places, and that recognition often comes not from position or wealth, but from the willingness to act boldly and honestly. As the crowd began to settle, some of the guests approached her to offer congratulations. Their words were genuine, not just polite acknowledgments of a performance, but heartfelt praise for her talent and the courage it took to perform so openly. She received each compliment with grace, smiling and thanking them, aware of the impact her music had made. This was more than recognition. It was validation, a confirmation that the hours of practice, the quiet perseverance, and the hidden moments of dedication had all been worth it. The billionaire, standing nearby, spoke quietly to his assistant. His usual air of decisiveness and control had softened. He was no longer thinking of influence or authority, but of opportunity and potential. He understood that he had encountered someone extraordinary, someone who had defied expectations and created a moment that would be remembered. He realized that true talent, when expressed with authenticity and courage, could not be commanded or forced. It had to be allowed to emerge, and when it did, it could captivate and inspire even the most critical of audiences. The young waitress felt a sense of clarity and purpose. The performance had shown her what she was capable of, not just in terms of skill, but in terms of confidence and self-expression. She had discovered a voice that could move people, connect with them, and leave a lasting impression. For years, she had worked quietly, unnoticed, but now she knew that her talent could not remain hidden. The recognition she had received was not just for the performance, but for her resilience, dedication, and authenticity. She walked away from the piano, her head held high, feeling the warmth of admiration and respect from the audience. The experience had transformed her understanding of herself and her potential. She had stepped into a space where she had been underestimated, and she had emerged as someone whose talent could not be ignored. The applause and praise were meaningful, but the true reward was the realization that she had proven to herself the value of her own abilities and the power of expressing them fearlessly. The evening continued, but the energy had shifted. The guests, who had arrived expecting routine entertainment, had witnessed something extraordinary. They had seen a young woman rise above expectation, using her talent and courage to create a shared moment of beauty and admiration. The memory of her performance would linger, not just because of technical skill, but because of the humanity and authenticity she brought to the piano. The young waitress had shown them that greatness can emerge from unexpected places, and that opportunity and recognition often come to those who are willing to embrace their own potential. The billionaire, reflecting on the evening, recognized the lesson he had witnessed. Power, wealth, and influence are not substitutes for talent and courage. The young waitress had demonstrated that authentic skill, combined with determination and self-belief, could command attention and respect without needing status or position. He understood that she had not only silenced the room with her music but had also reshaped his understanding of value and potential. As the night drew to a close, the young waitress felt a sense of completion. She had taken a moment of coercion and turned it into an opportunity for self-expression and recognition. She had proven her ability to herself and to the audience, and in doing so, she had opened doors to new possibilities. The experience was not just about a single performance. It was about realizing the power of her own voice, the strength in her authenticity, and the potential that could be unleashed when talent meets courage. The crowd began to disperse, leaving behind a room that still seemed charged with the energy of her music. Conversations lingered on the performance, the skill, and the emotion that had filled the space. People would remember this night not just for the entertainment, but for the revelation of hidden talent and the reminder that greatness can emerge from anyone, regardless of background or circumstance. The young waitress had become a symbol of resilience, talent, and the transformative power of self-expression. In the quiet aftermath, she reflected on the journey that had led her here. Every long day of work, every quiet hour of practice, every moment she had persevered despite being unnoticed had culminated in this moment. She realized that her voice, her talent, and her courage had always been within her, waiting for the opportunity to be shared. And now, having faced the challenge, embraced it, and emerged triumphant, she understood that her future was filled with endless possibilities. The applause and recognition were powerful, but the true reward was the knowledge that she had claimed her place and her voice, and that nothing could take that away from her.